Around 2 weeks ago, two masked gunmen walked into a magazine in France, in Paris, and shot dead 11 people, including three cartoonists at the magazine. The name of the magazine was Charlie Hebdo, Hebdo, which roughly translates to Charlie Weekly. Why did they go into a magazine and then themselves end up dead? Why did two men risk their lives to go into a media property? Well, it's impossible to say, but most of the analysts believe that it was because this magazine, which is a magazine that publishes satire and parody and commentary on social injustices, that's not what they only publish on, but a lot of what they publish on, but the idea of parody, this magazine published some cartoons depicting Muhammad visually, and making fun in a way, but also making a serious point of how he must feel sad to have people who are following him, who are so fervent about their beliefs that they are willing to be offended to the absolute nth degree of humanity and kill somebody. Now, I'm not starting class this way with my first video lecture to wade into an ongoing and long-standing dispute between Christians and Muslims and other religious beliefs. I'm starting class off this way to talk about the power of media. And in this case, a French magazine publishing cartoons, some of which weren't even originally the French magazines. They were done by a Danish newspaper and then reprinted in the French magazine to lead two people to be so offended at their core that they would kill somebody else and risk their own lives. It truly is amazing, and it speaks to the absolute utter power of media, at least in this particular sense. And it sort of gets into what this class is all about. We're going to be studying media from many countries, not just the ones in the book, also other countries, ones that you might personally be interested in. Many of you will have Italian heritage, for example. Pennsylvania has a lot of Italians, so does New Jersey, Italian descendants. The purpose of this course is to study media from around the world so that we can learn not just about how those media are different, but also about ourselves. Why is it that we believe what we believe, and how is it that we think is based on what we're being exposed to? And in many cases, we're being exposed to media. So this is a class that will jump right into that. As I mentioned in my intro video, I'm very interested in teaching this subject because of my opportunities to travel to various countries, many in Europe, also in the Caribbean, Canada, where I've taken my classes to many times over the years. I've been to Ghana in Africa, and I've been to China. But the country that I've been going to most recently and most deeply is Mexico. I was in Mexico when I was writing my book for the class, Comparing Media from Around the World, just to show you what the cover looks like. It's a book that you'll be working from throughout the class. I was in Mexico to gather research for that book, and when I was there, the U.S. Embassy got wind of my research and wanted to start bringing me down there to conduct some workshops. So they ended up hiring me as a consultant to speak to journalists and to speak to media regulators in Mexico to help them understand some of the things that the U.S. was doing to regulate media. For example, taking the FCC, a federal agency, and making it independent of political influence, at least in theory, so that it would be an independent regulator of media. Now, we'll talk later about whether that's actually the case or not, but I'm just mentioning to you to tell you about how my travels and also my research has led me to have an extreme passion for this subject. I find it just fascinating how other countries have such very different media, and I hope to lead you to have a somewhat passionate view as well on that score. Some of you may already have it. Some of you, I'm sure, have been traveling around the world and picking up newspapers, and even if you haven't, you've been maybe watching some foreign films or some foreign television, or in the very least accessing foreign content on the web. And so we're going to explore your knowledge as well in this class. What is this class about? It's about studying media by slicing those media. If you've read chapter 1 already, you know it's slicing media systems, when we'll define what a system is. So it's slicing media systems into elements. And when you look at those elements individually, you can compare them across different countries and see how those countries differ and how they're similar by looking at the elements. For example, one element is financing. Who pays for media? Is it a person who purchases media at a bookstore or at a newsstand or on a cable bill? Or are media financed by advertising? That means a company takes out a page space or takes out 30 seconds of video or audio and makes an ad, and that's how it pays for the medium. We're going to learn about financing as one of the elements that when you slice up a media system is really interesting to compare across different countries. The book is a book that I wrote because simply there was no other book that I really was comfortable with in teaching this class. And so a book rep found themselves in my office one day and asked me if I needed anything. And when I responded no, they said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to write a book. And they said, do you have anything? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I have a sabbatical proposal to go work on a book, but that's what I have. They read that and they said, we want you to write this book. So there you have comparing media from around the world. It took me 3 years. I took my backpack, I took my laptop, which was heavy at that time, 2005, 2006, and I went around to 6 of the 8 countries. I went to 6 of the 8. As you know, if you've looked at the book, we've got 8 countries that we focus on in this book. We've got in Europe 3 of them, we've got France, the UK, and Sweden. We've got the United States, Mexico, China, Lebanon, and Ghana. At the time that I wrote the book, I'd been to every country except for Lebanon and China, but I've since been to China, so I can comment firsthand on that. So what you're going to get from this book is a lot of really firsthand experience. And I'm talking material that's derived from me sitting in offices of government regulators like I did in the high-rise in Paris, interviewing high-level officials about their media systems. That's what you're going to get in this class. That's what you're going to get as you read the book. I'm not going to go over the syllabus line by line, because that's what the purpose of having it on D2L is for. It's under the Content tab. And also, just using video as a medium is not that effective for going over documents line by line. But I will tell you that this course will have you graded basically according to 3 components. The first is going to be a quiz, and you'll be taking one of those today. And I will say something in this video that helps you with at least one of those questions in that quiz. Secondly, you're going to engage in discussion posts. I'm going to be asking some questions and then asking you to discuss those questions in your posts. And on that score, I'm going to be looking to see how you cite material in the book. I'm not just talking about saying, oh, page, etc., this concept was mentioned. I'm talking about taking a concept that you read from the book and really applying it to the discussion answer that you provide online. That's going to show me not just that you're reading the book, also that you are applying your own knowledge and your own reasoning and your own interpretation and trying to understand what it is that I would like you to answer by using what you're reading from the book. So that's your second main grade in this class. Is going to be discussion questions. And then the third main grade is going to come from a research paper. This is a 400 level class. A 400 level class is supposed to be a research-based class. So you're going to be researching 2 media samples at the end of this course. Those 2 media samples, one of them is going to come from the United States and another is going to come from another country of your choice. Could be 2 films, could be 2 episodes of a TV show, could be 2 newspapers, could be 2 songs. And that's going to be your third component of your grade, your research paper. All right, now I'd like to go on to finish out what I want to highlight when it comes to this chapter. I do want to emphasize again that media are radically different around the world. That example that I started out class with, the Charlie Hebdo, the French magazine. Think for a moment whether we have any publication, even just going by my description, do we have any publication like that in the U.S.? Well, maybe you might answer. You might say The Onion, if you know that one from Washington, D.C., or perhaps Mother Jones, if you've read that before. But there's nothing really like a magazine that uses cartoons to communicate a message, and a message that is often very, very serious. If you really want to be the stellar student, sometime in the near future, go on to online and look at some of the content of Charlie Hebdo, even though you may not know French, and try and explore this a little bit further. So that's one example. There are many, many other examples, though, of how media are different. One of the most common areas in which media are different is obscenity. I can't quite describe the feeling of pulling up to a gas station in Sweden, and I'm filling up my car, and across the speakers on the radio comes this American singer, and he's actually singing about driving around in his car, and then he says, "And I look so fucking good." Wow. That's on radio in Sweden. Can you imagine if that happened here in the United States, what kind of trouble the disc jockey and the radio station and the company would be in, and how long we'd be talking about, and the fines that would come down? So media are radically different from around the world. Now, the 8 countries that I've chosen to analyze in this book, yeah, they have limitations. For example, I don't have a single country from South America. However, with these 8 countries, you're going to get enough variety that you'll know what kind of possibilities exist out there when it comes to setting up a media system, even though we're only discussing 8 out of the 200 countries. And isn't that amazing? In the very beginning of this book, some of the information that I was able to point out, which it should be obvious to us, but it is not, including that there are 200 countries in the world. And how many are you going to get to travel to or be in by the time you pass away? How many? 1, 2, 3? Most people, it's going to be a handful. If you get into that teens and 20s, you're doing really well. Imagine someone who's traveled to all 200 countries in the United States. This is even possible. You probably have to spend your whole life traveling, right? And that is actually another dimension that's interesting about the world, is that it takes 2 days to travel around in an airplane. And that's a lot of time in the air to travel around a globe. Amongst the world, you have countries with various languages, and prior to reading this chapter, my guess is you thought that English was the most well-spoken chapter. But it's not, right? Not the most well-spoken chapter, it's spoken by most people in the world. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not. English is not. English is the third most commonly spoken, or spoken by the most people. I have to be very precise about this. I'll tell you why in a moment. English is spoken by, is in the third place when it comes to how many people speak it. In second place is Spanish, and in first place is China, or Chinese, Mandarin Chinese. And so that brings up another point, and that is that English is more well-known. It's more well-known because it's spoken in more places, yeah, and it's spoken more often. Primarily because the UK conquered 1/4 of the world with its Navy fleet in the 1800s, including such far-reaching places as Singapore, Australia, the United States, and islands in the Caribbean. So it spread English around the world, and English just continues to be spread around the world by media. Most media have an English version, whether they're produced in France or Spain or the United States or Canada. There's English media are circulating around the world much more than Chinese media, Spanish media, French media, etc. So that will set up some of the other kind of nuances that go on in some of these countries we're going to take a look at, like France, which used to have the most commonly spoken language in the world, as well as Mexico, where Spanish is the predominant language. I want to mention now what the importance is of comparing. Why is this book about comparing media? Comparing gives you a point of reference, number one. It's how you learn in life that you're tall or short, or that you're funny or serious, or that you're a night owl or a morning person, or you're a picky eater or you're not a picky eater. You learn that by comparing yourself to someone else. And that's why comparing as a basic tool of analysis is very, very important. That's why we have 8 countries to compare in this book. But secondly, comparing also allows you to overcome what's called cultural myopia. Hint, quiz question. Cultural myopia is a term that I invented for this book, and it's drawn from optometry, really, because myopia is being short-sighted. When you look at things close up, like I'm looking at this phone right now, it's real clear, but if I look out the window, which you can't see here in my house, I guess I could show it to you. Yeah, that window right there. If I look out that window, it's blurry to me. That means I have a myopia. So how does that come to play in media studies? Well, if you're looking at the world through the media that only exist in your country, you're going to have a certain short-sightedness to it. For example, if you watch a comedy from another country, and the comedy seems to be based in very, very slow-moving subplots that weave their way into a whole, and the jokes don't start to come out until really late, and you have to decide on your own to laugh, well, that's going to be very different from a Disney comedy where you have a laugh track that's going off every minute, ha 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 ha, ha, telling you to laugh at every twist and turn that they want you to laugh at. It's very, very different. And so if you look at the other foreign comedy, the slow-moving one, and you say, boy, that's boring, that's myopic. It's short-sighted. You're not seeing it clearly in the background. You're not able to understand that this is a way of laughing that is built upon a slow understanding of a deep problem and then coming to a conclusion that says, it's really kind of funny. That's a completely different way of laughing at a joke. So cultural myopia is when you are short-sighted about another country. And the quick example I give in the book, just to really make it concrete, is when you say the English beer is warm. Well, no, it's not warm, it's warmer. It's warmer compared to our beer because the kind of beer that's served, ales, are best served at room temperature so that they can breathe. That is cultural myopia. That's what we're trying to avoid by learning the kinds of things that we're learning in this class. All right, and lastly, I'm just going to mention that this book has a rhetorical perspective to it. Those of you who have taken rhetoric classes in our department, and there are a few, will know that this has something to do with meaning, and that's what I'm saying here by using rhetorical perspective, which is to say that when you talk about the stuff in this book in your discussion questions or with me in person, there is no one right or wrong answer. There's no feeling like you're inadequate. Rhetoric or rhetorical perspective is saying that any meaning is possible depending on how well you argue it. So whatever meaning you come out with in this book is okay. What we're trying to say, though, is that no country is better than any other country. We may say that one country has a particular strength in this area of media, in the way that media are financed, for example, by advertising. One country is really strong, but we're not saying it's a better country or a worse country because of it. So keep that in mind. It should free you up to speak about media and really develop your honest thoughts. All right, the rest of the book is broken down according to those elements of media systems that I mentioned. We'll be getting into them very, very shortly in the next class. But this is going to right now conclude our very first instructor video. Glad you've joined us. Have a great day.